I stood frozen in my childhood bedroom as my father casually mentioned they'd gifted my house, the one I'd paid mortgage on for 7 years, to my sister's husband, Derek. And we were thinking your lakeside cabin would make a perfect summer home for them too. If you're reading this from a place where family has taken advantage of you too, I understand that gut-wrenching feeling. Before I dive into how I discovered my parents had betrayed me for their golden son-in-law and what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Has your family ever put someone else's needs above yours? Hit subscribe. If you want more stories about standing up to family injustice, trust me, this one has an ending you won't see coming. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut, I was always the practical one. My name is Melissa Harrington, and at 32 I'd built a successful career as an architect at one of Boston's top firms. I specialised in sustainable design and had recently been featured in Architectural Digest for a zero-carbon footprint community centre I'd designed. Professional success came through hard work and determination, traits I'd developed early as the eldest daughter in the Harrington family. Our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Dad Richard, a successful insurance executive, Mum Martha, former elementary school teacher turned full-time homemaker, me and my younger sister Emily. We lived in a colonial-style house, with a white picket fence in a neighbourhood where everyone knew each other's business. Sunday dinners were mandatory, holidays were elaborate affairs, and appearances mattered above all else. But beneath that Norman Rockwell exterior ran an undercurrent of favouritism so blatant that even our neighbours commented on it, though never to my parents' faces. Emily, 4 years younger than me, was the golden child from the moment she was born, with her blonde curls and big blue eyes. She looked like a carbon copy of my mother, while I inherited my dad's darker features and analytical mind. "Emily's just more delicate than you, sweetheart. You've always been so independent," my mother would say whenever I pointed out the disparity in how we were treated. This delicacy somehow translated to Emily getting the larger bedroom with the window seat I coveted, brand new clothes while I got hand-me-downs from our cousin, and elaborate birthday parties while mine were simple. Affairs at the local pizza place. The pattern continued into our teen years. When I needed braces, I had to babysit to help pay for them. When Emily needed them 2 years later, Dad's insurance suddenly covered orthodontics. I worked summers at the local grocery store to save for college, while Emily spent summers at dance camp and art programs. The disparities were so common I stopped noticing them. They were just facts of life, like Connecticut humidity in August. My parents were well-meaning in their own way. Dad believed strongly in traditional family structures, where men were providers and women were nurturers. "A woman needs protection in this world," he'd say, especially after I broke up with Jason, my college boyfriend. Mum would nod sagely, adding, "Family is everything, Melissa. When you're older, you'll understand." Emily embraced their worldview wholeheartedly. She attended community college for 2 years before dropping out to work as a receptionist at a local medical office. There she met Derek Chamberlain, a pharmaceutical sales representative whose family had old Connecticut money and connections. Derek was handsome in that preppy northeastern way, sailing trophies, summer homes in the Hamptons and a Harvard MBA. My parents were instantly smitten. Their wedding 3 years ago was the social event of the season in our small town. My parents spent $67,000 on it, a fact I learned when Mum accidentally left the budget spreadsheet open on her laptop. This was the same year they told me they couldn't help with the down payment on my apartment because money was tight. I wore a hideous peach bridesmaid dress, gave a heartfelt speech I spent weeks writing, and watched my parents beam with pride at their perfect daughter and her perfect husband. After the wedding, Emily and Derek moved into a rental while they figured out their next steps. Meanwhile, I'd been living in Boston and commuting back to Connecticut on weekends to work on the family home. 7 years ago, when my grandmother passed away and left my parents some money, they proposed what seemed like a win-win arrangement. "The house needs work, Melissa, and you've always had an eye for design," Dad said. "If you handle the mortgage payments and renovations, it'll be yours eventually. We're getting older and thinking of downsizing to a condo anyway." We never signed formal paperwork. They were my parents, after all, but I had emails, texts, and witnesses to our arrangement. Over 7 years, I'd put $176,000 into mortgage payments and another $48,000 into renovations. I'd restored the original hardwood floors, updated the kitchen with energy-efficient appliances, and converted the attic into a home office space. I'd planned to move in permanently next year when my Boston lease ended. The only property I owned outright was a small cabin in Vermont near Lake Champlain. I'd purchased it 2 years ago with my savings and a small inheritance from my father's mother. It wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a deck overlooking the water, but it was mine. The cabin represented everything I'd worked for: independence, security, and a place that was just mine without family strings attached. My relationship status was another point of contention. I'd recently ended a 3-year relationship with Michael, an environmental engineer I'd met through work. My parents never warmed to him, partly because he was divorced and partly because he wasn't interested in the country club lifestyle they aspired to. "You're not getting any younger, Melissa," Mum would say after every visit. 30 is around the corner, and you know what that means for starting a family. Despite building a successful career, buying property, and living independently, I was still somehow the family disappointment. No husband meant no success in their eyes. Meanwhile, Emily and Derek represented everything my parents valued: traditional, marriage, connections to good families, and the promise of grandchildren to spoil. Little did I know how far they would go to support that ideal at my expense. The first Sunday in April started like any other family dinner. I'd driven from Boston that morning, stopping to pick up a bottle of wine and flowers for Mum. Spring had finally arrived in New England, and the dogwood trees in my parents' yard were beginning to bloom. I parked behind Emily's new Mercedes SUV, a push present from Derek, though she was only 4 months pregnant. Something felt off from the moment I walked in. Dad gave me a quick side hug instead of his usual bare embrace. Mum seemed overly interested in the pasta sauce, stirring it constantly to avoid eye contact. Emily and Derek sat in the living room, sharing secretive smiles and whispers that stopped whenever I entered the room. "So, how's work?" Dad asked over appetizers, his voice too loud, too forced. "Really good, actually. I just got promoted to senior project lead," I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "It means a 15% raise, and I'll be heading the new sustainable housing development in Cambridge." "That's nice, dear," Mum said, barely looking up from arranging crackers on a plate. "Did you hear Emily and Derek's news?" On cue, Emily placed her hand over her still flat stomach. "We found out it's a boy," she announced, as if revealing she'd discovered the cure for cancer. "We're going to name him Richard, after Dad." The next 20 minutes were devoted entirely to baby Richard. His nursery plans, his future in lacrosse or sailing, his Harvard legacy status courtesy of Derek's family connections. My promotion lay forgotten, like so many achievements before. As Mum served the main course, Emily dominated the conversation with tales of her pregnancy symptoms. "The doctor says everything's progressing perfectly," she said, accepting the largest portion of roast from Mum. "We're going to need so much more space now." I caught a significant look passing between my parents at that comment. Dad cleared his throat while Mum suddenly became fascinated with the pattern on her dinner plate. After dinner, as Emily and Mum cleared dishes, Dad asked me to join him in his study. The room smelled of leather and the pipe he occasionally still smoked despite Mum's disapproval. He settled into his armchair and motioned for me to sit opposite him. "Melissa, there's something we need to discuss," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your mother and I have been thinking about the family's future, about legacy and providing for the next generation." I nodded, assuming this was about their will or estate planning, reasonable discussions for parents in their 60s. "As you know, Emily and Derek are starting their family now," he continued, fidgeting with a pen on his desk. "They're going to need space, stability, a family home to raise little Richard." "That makes sense," I said. "I'm sure they'll find a great house once they start looking." Dad coughed, then said the words that stopped my heart. Actually, we've already taken care of that. We've transferred the deed of this house to Emily and Derek. We signed the papers 3 months ago. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. This house? My house? The one I've been paying the mortgage on for 7 years? Well, technically it was always our house, Dad said, his tone suddenly defensive. Your name was never on the deed. The room seemed to tilt sideways. But we had an agreement. I've put over $170,000 into mortgage payments, plus all the renovations. And we appreciate that, sweetheart. You've been a big help with the bills. He said, as if I'd been slipping him $20 here and there instead of making formal mortgage payments. But Emily and Derek need it more now. They're starting a family. I struggled to process what he was saying. So all the money I've put into this house, that's just gone. Derek has very generously offered to compensate us for the property, Dad said, emphasising us in a way that made it clear I wasn't included. And they'll keep some of your renovations, though Emily has different taste in kitchens. I felt nauseous. You sold them my house? Without telling me? After I've been paying the mortgage for 7 years? It's not like that, Dad said, looking uncomfortable but determined. Family helps family. Emily needs this now. You have your career, your apartment in Boston. He paused, then dropped the second bombshell. And we were thinking your lakeside cabin would make a perfect summer home for them too. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat perfectly still, trying to breathe through the betrayal threatening to choke me. The cabin is in my name, I said finally, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. You can't give away something that isn't yours. Dad waved his hand dismissively. Of course, but family shares, Melissa. You're hardly ever there, and imagine how much little Richard would enjoy summers by the lake. Emily always loved swimming as a child. In that moment, I saw my father clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. Not as the strong provider I'd idolised growing up, but as a man willing to sacrifice one daughter's security for the other's comfort. The realisation was devastating. I need to go, I said. Standing so abruptly, my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Don't be dramatic, Melissa, Dad said, his tone shifting to irritation. This is what families do. They support each other. Your sister needs this more than you do right now. I walked out without another word, past the kitchen where Mum and Emily were laughing about something, past Derek lounging in the living room scrolling through his phone. I got into my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the key. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of my family in the bay window. Dad explaining something with animated hands, Mum looking worried, Emily placing a protective hand over her stomach and Derek smirking directly at me. The perfect family portrait with me permanently cropped out. I made it exactly 3.7 miles from my parents' house before pulling into the parking lot of Riverside Park, where I'd spent countless hours as a teenager sketching building designs and dreaming of the future. Now, at 32, those dreams were crumbling around me. The reality of what had just happened hit me in waves. Not only had my parents given away the house I'd invested 7 years and nearly $200,000 in, but they were now eyeing my cabin, the only property I truly owned. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and allowed myself 10 minutes of pure, unadulterated panic. When the initial shock subsided, architect brain kicked in, the analytical part of me that solved complex structural problems for a living. I needed facts, documentation, and a plan. Pulling out my phone, I called the one person who would understand both the legal and emotional aspects of my situation. Vanessa, it's Melissa. I need your help. Vanessa Chen had been my roommate at Columbia, and was now a real estate attorney in Hartford. She was also one of the few people who had witnessed firsthand the dynamic in my family over the years. 40 minutes later, we were sitting in a 24-hour diner, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. Let me get this straight, Vanessa said after I'd explained everything. You've been paying the mortgage on your parents' house for 7 years, with the understanding that it would eventually be yours. I nodded. Dad proposed it after Grandma died. They got some inheritance money, but didn't want to put it all into the house. The arrangement made sense. I handled the mortgage and renovations, and the house would be mine when they moved to a smaller place. And you have documentation of this agreement? Nothing notarized, I admitted, but I have emails, texts, bank statements showing all the payments. I have contractors who can verify I paid for renovations, and at least a dozen people, including extended family, who heard my parents refer to it as Melissa's house over the years. Vanessa's expression was grim. Without your name on the deed or a formal contract, it's going to be challenging, but not impossible. She pulled out a legal pad. First thing tomorrow, I'm going to check the property records. I want to see exactly when this transfer happened and under what terms. The next morning, Vanessa called with news that made my stomach drop. The deed was transferred to Emily and Derek Chamberlain exactly 12 weeks ago. There's also a new mortgage on the property in their names, significantly larger than what would be left on your parents' original loan. They've remortgaged it, I asked, trying to make sense of this. Why would they need to do that? That's what we need to find out, Vanessa said. Also, I checked the Vermont property records. Your cabin is secure. It's solely in your name. But I'd suggest you get up there as soon as possible and make sure they don't have access. A series of text messages from Emily arrived while I was still processing this information. Melissa, I hope you're not upset about the house. Mum and Dad always intended it for whoever started a family first. It's nothing personal. Derek and I were thinking of painting your old bedroom for the nursery. Is there anything you want from there before we clear it out? Also, can we get the keys to the cabin? We want to check it out before summer. Derek thinks it might need some upgrades for the baby. Her casual tone, as if she hadn't just benefited from the theft of 7 years of my financial investment, made my blood boil. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my mother, hoping for some explanation that would make sense of this betrayal. Mum, how could you do this? We had an agreement about the house. Her voice was defensive immediately. Melissa, you're overreacting. We never promised you the house outright. We said you could live there while helping with expenses. That's not true, and you know it, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I have emails where Dad specifically says, when the house is yours and invest in your future home. I've been making full mortgage payments, not helping with expenses. Family helps family, Mum said, repeating Dad's phrase from the night before. Emily and Derek need the house more than you do. They're starting a family. And what about my investment? The years of payments, the renovations? Derek has compensated us fairly for the property, she said, avoiding my actual question. Compensated you? It wasn't yours to sell anymore. Not morally, anyway. I took a deep breath. And now you want my cabin too? No one is taking your cabin, Mum said, her voice taking on the patronising tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. We just think sharing it would be the generous thing to do, for little Richard. The baby who wasn't even born yet was already being used as emotional leverage, classic Harrington family manipulation. I need to go, Mum. I'll be by tomorrow. To get my things from the house. The next day was Saturday. I arrived at the house, no longer my house, at 10 in the morning, hoping to avoid a confrontation. No such luck. Emily's Mercedes was in the driveway, along with a white van marked Premier Home Renovations. I used my key one last time and walked into chaos. The living room furniture had been pushed to one side, and a man with a tape measure was examining the fireplace. Upstairs I could hear multiple voices and the sound of something heavy being moved. I found Emily in what had been my bedroom since childhood, directing 2 workers who were removing the built-in bookshelf I'd installed 3 years ago. "Oh, Melissa," she said, looking momentarily flustered. "I didn't know you were coming by today." "Clearly," I said, taking in the scene. The walls had already been painted a pale blue, erasing the warm terracotta colour I'd chosen. "I texted Dad I'd be picking up my things. He must have forgotten to mention it," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Derek's just measuring for the nursery furniture. We're thinking of putting the crib where your desk was." As if summoned, Derek appeared in the doorway. At 36, he was conventionally handsome with the confident bearing of someone who'd never had to question his place in the world. He wore khakis and a polo shirt with the collar slightly popped, like he'd just stepped off a yacht. "Melissa, good to see you," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What do you think of the changes so far? Emily has such a vision for this place." "I think you're removing custom bookshelves that cost me $4,000 to install," I said flatly. Derek shrugged. "They don't really match the nursery aesthetic, but your parents always said this would be our starter home someday, so we're making it our own." The casual confirmation that my parents had been planning this betrayal for who knows how long felt like a slap. "When exactly did they start telling you that?" "Oh, pretty much since Emily and I got engaged," he said, completely oblivious to the bomb he was dropping. "Richard mentioned you were helping with the upkeep until we were ready to take over. It's a great arrangement. We get a family home, with tons of built-in equity, and you got to play house designer for a few years." I stared at him, speechless with rage. Play house designer? I'd poured my heart, soul, and most of my disposable income into this house for 7 years. "I need to get my things," I said finally, turning away before I said something I couldn't take back. Sure, Derek said magnanimously. "Take whatever's personally yours, but the fixtures stay, of course. Oh, and before you go, do you have the keys to that Vermont cabin? We're thinking of checking it out next weekend. Might need some work before it's baby ready." I left without answering, gathering the personal items I couldn't bear to leave behind. Photo albums, my grandmother's quilt, the art supplies in the attic. Everything else, furniture I'd bought, curtains I'd sewn, the garden I'd planted, I left behind. It wasn't worth the fight, at least not yet. Before leaving, I methodically photographed every room, documenting the renovations I'd paid for. I collected every receipt, bank statement, and text message related to the house. I recorded a conversation with Mr. Peterson next door, who confirmed he'd heard my parents refer to it as Melissa's house numerous times over the years. As I was loading the last box into my car, I overheard a conversation through the open kitchen window that made me freeze. "The bank approved the full amount," Derek was saying, his voice hushed but excited. $250,000 against the equity, more than enough to cover what I lost in the Westport deal. "Are you sure this is necessary?" My father's voice concerned. "It's a lot of debt to take on with the baby coming." "Trust me, Richard," Derek replied smoothly. "This investment opportunity is golden. We'll triple our money in 18 months, easy. Then we can pay off this mortgage and maybe even help you and Martha with that condo in Florida you've been talking about." "Well, you've never steered us wrong before," Dad said, though he sounded less than convinced. So that was it. Derek had lost money in some deal, remortgaged the house to recoup his losses, and was now promising my parents a return on investment. And somehow, my cabin was part of this financial shell game too. As I drove back to Boston, one thought kept circling in my mind. This wasn't just about family favoritism anymore. This was about money, manipulation, and the systematic exploitation of my labor and finances, and I was done being the family doormat. The betrayal forced me to re-examine my entire childhood through a new lens. What I had accepted as normal family dynamics now revealed themselves as something more insidious. Lying in my Boston apartment that night, memories flooded back with painful clarity. I remembered my 10th birthday, when Emily, only 6 at the time, had thrown such a tantrum about my party that my parents had bought her a new doll, so she wouldn't feel left out. I recalled my high school graduation, where my parents had spent the celebration dinner discussing Emily's upcoming dance recital. I thought about college move-in day, when Dad had helped me carry exactly 1 box before announcing they needed to get back to Connecticut because Emily had a cold. Individual incidents that seemed minor in isolation formed a disturbing pattern when viewed collectively. I'd normalized it all, making excuses. Emily's younger. She needs more attention. She's not as independent as you are. I'd internalized their narrative so completely that I'd never questioned why I was always expected to give, while she was always entitled to take. The next morning, I called my father's sister, Aunt Judith. Unlike my parents, Aunt Judith had forged Her own path, never married, built a successful marketing agency in New York, travelled extensively. My parents considered her the family oddball, but she'd always been my secret role model. "I've been waiting for this call for about 20 years, she said, after I explained the situation. "I love my brother, but the way he and Martha have treated you compared to Emily is shameful." "Was it always this way?" I asked, "even when we were little?" "From the beginning," Aunt Judith confirmed. "Your mother had difficult pregnancies with both of you, but she nearly lost Emily in the 3rd trimester. After that, Emily became precious in a way that, I'm sorry to say this, you never were. Richard went along with it because, well, he's always had very traditional views about family. He worried about you being too independent from the time you were a toddler." "Too independent? I was a child." "You were a child who liked to figure things out for yourself," Aunt Judith said. "You walked early, talked early, read early. You didn't need them in the way Emily did, and instead of being proud of that, they were threatened by it, especially Martha." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Aunt Judith filling in gaps I hadn't even known existed. She told me about family gatherings where my parents had bragged about Emily's mediocre achievements while downplaying my significant ones. She revealed that my maternal grandparents had left each grandchild a small inheritance, but my parents had managed mine because I was too focused on career to think about finances, a story I'd never heard before. "They've been telling the extended family for years that you were just helping with bills at the house, not buying it," Aunt Judith said, confirming my worst suspicions. "I tried to correct them once at Thanksgiving, and Martha changed the subject so fast it gave me whiplash." After speaking with Aunt Judith, I reached out to my childhood best friend Zoe, who had witnessed my family dynamic firsthand for over a decade. "I always wondered why you put up with it," she said when I told her about the house. "Remember, in 8th grade when your parents missed your science fair, but drove 2 hours to see Emily's 15-second role in the community theatre production? Or senior year, when they bought Emily a car for her 16th birthday but made you work at the grocery store for yours?" "I thought that was normal," I said quietly. "I thought I just needed to try harder, achieve more to get their attention." "Mel, nothing you could have done would have changed that dynamic," Zoe said gently. "Emily was the golden child, and you were the family ATM," I finished bitterly. Speaking with people who had observed my family from the outside helped me see the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just about a house or a cabin. It was about a lifetime of being valued less, of having my contributions taken for granted, of being expected to sacrifice while Emily was entitled to receive. I know some of you watching have experienced similar family dynamics, that realization that you've been the responsible one, the one who gives, while someone else always takes. If you've ever felt that family obligation weighed more heavily on your shoulders than on others, let me know in the comments. Were you the reliable sibling who was expected to be the bigger person while others got away with selfishness? Your stories helped me feel less alone in mine. The most revealing conversation came when I met my cousin Rachel for coffee. Rachel and I had been close as children, but had drifted apart in adulthood. Partly, I now realised, because my parents had subtly discouraged the relationship after Rachel had chosen a career path similar to mine. "There's something you should know," Rachel said hesitantly after I'd explained the situation with the house. "Last Christmas at Grandma's, I overheard your mom talking to Aunt Linda about Emily and Derek's finances." My stomach tightened. "What? About them?" "Derek apparently lost a bunch of money in some investment scheme. Something about a development in Westport that fell through. Your dad had invested with him too, about 50,000. She paused, looking uncomfortable. "Your Mom said they were leveraging family assets to help Derek recover and protect their investment. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but now it makes perfect sense," I finished, the final pieces clicking into place. This wasn't just about favouring Emily. My parents had financial skin in the game with Derek, money they'd likely pulled from their retirement savings, and they were using my house and potentially my cabin as collateral to recoup their losses. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence. Bank statements showing 7 years of mortgage payments, receipts for renovations, text messages and emails referencing your house and when you own it, photos of the improvements I'd made, statements from family and friends confirming my understanding of the arrangement. I was at a crossroads. I could walk away, cut ties with my toxic family and start fresh, writing off the house as an expensive life lesson. Or I could fight for what was rightfully mine, knowing it would likely destroy any chance of reconciliation. As I weighed my options, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Derek found the perfect contractor for the cabin renovations. Can you send the keys? We're thinking of adding a 3rd bedroom and maybe a dock for future summers. They weren't even pretending to ask permission anymore. In their minds, my cabin was already theirs. In that moment, my decision became clear. I could forgive the decades of emotional neglect. I could even, with time, forgive the theft of the house. But I would not stand by and watch them take the one thing that was truly legally mine. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about finally standing up for myself against a lifetime of being treated as less deserving, less important, less worthy of consideration than my sister. It was about refusing to play the role they'd assigned me, the responsible one who sacrifices so Emily could shine. I picked up the phone and called Vanessa. I want to fight, I said without preamble, for the house, for the money I've invested, for everything, and I need to protect my cabin. I was hoping you'd say that, Vanessa replied. I've already started drafting the paperwork. I scheduled the family meeting for the following Saturday, giving myself a week to prepare. Vanessa helped me organise my documentation and coached me on what to say. Stick to facts, she advised. Don't let them derail you with emotional manipulation. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock at my parents' house, the house that should have been mine. I arrived early, my portfolio of evidence tucked under my arm, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Mum answered the door with a tight smile. Melissa, good, you're here. Everyone's in the living room. I've made coffee and those almond cookies you like. The attempt at normalcy was jarring. Did she really think cookies would smooth over what they'd done? Dad sat in his usual armchair, looking uncomfortable but determined. Emily perched on the sofa, one hand resting protectively on her barely there baby bump. Derek stood by the fireplace, my renovated fireplace with the custom mantel I'd commissioned from a local artisan, looking irritated, as if this meeting was an inconvenience in his busy schedule. Thank you all for meeting with me, I began formally, declining the offered seat. Standing gave me a psychological advantage I wasn't willing to relinquish. I've asked to speak with you about the house and my financial investment in it over the past 7 years. Melissa, if this is about your things, you can come by any time. Mum started. This isn't about my belongings, I interrupted. This is about the $176,000 in mortgage payments and the $48,000 in renovations I've invested in this house under the agreement that it would eventually be mine. I removed the first document from my portfolio, a spreadsheet detailing every payment I'd made, with corresponding bank statements. I placed it on the coffee table. As you can see, I haven't been helping with bills. I've been making full mortgage payments since April 2017. I have emails from Dad confirming this arrangement. I placed those printouts on top of the spreadsheet. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Melissa, I think you misunderstood. I also have texts from Mum referring to it as your house and your investment, I continued, adding those to the growing pile of evidence. Plus statements from Aunt Judith, Uncle Robert and 4 family friends who confirm they heard you refer to this as Melissa's house on multiple occasions. Why are you doing this? Emily interjected, her voice wavering. We're having a baby. Why are you being so selfish? I'd anticipated this exact response, the immediate pivot to making me the villain. This isn't about your baby, Emily. This is about the fact that I've invested over $200,000 in this property based on an agreement that has now been violated. Investment, Derek scoffed, speaking for the first time. You didn't have any legal agreement. Your signature isn't on the deed. That's correct, I acknowledged. But in the state of Connecticut, Verbal agreements supported by consistent action and documentation can be legally binding. It's called promissory estoppel, a legal principle that prevents someone from going back on their word when another person has reasonably relied on that promise and acted accordingly. Derek's smug expression faltered slightly. He hadn't expected me to come with legal terminology. We never promised you ownership, Dad insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. We said you could live here while helping with expenses. That's not supported by the evidence, I countered, pulling out more documentation. Here's an email from you dated September 2018, where you specifically write, "The bathroom renovations will add value when the house is fully yours." And here's a text from February 2020, where you ask me to invest in better kitchen appliances, since it's your house long term. The room fell silent as my parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "What exactly do you want, Melissa?" Dad finally asked, his tone resigned. "I want compensation for my investment," I stated clearly. "The full amount I've put into this property, plus interest. And I want written acknowledgement that my cabin in Vermont belongs solely to me and is not available for family use without my explicit permission." $200,000. Mum looked shocked. "We don't have that kind of money." "Actually," I said, turning to Derek, "I believe you." "Do? You remortgaged this house for $250,000 just 3 months ago. The property records are public." Derek's face flushed with anger. "That's none of your business. Your parents accepted my offer for the house, $30,000. That's more than generous considering the legal situation." $30,000? I repeated incredulously. "For a house with over $400,000 in equity, much of which I created through my payments and renovations." I turned to my parents. "You sold my investment for pennies on the dollar, and you've already spent that money, haven't you?" The guilty looks on their faces confirmed my suspicion. "Derek's investment went bad," I continued, watching him closely. "The Westport deal fell through, so you needed capital quickly, and my house, with all the equity I'd built up, was the perfect solution." "How did you—" Derek began, then caught himself. "That's irrelevant. The house legally belonged to your parents. They chose to transfer it to us. End of story." "Not quite," I said, pulling out the final document, the one Vanessa had prepared. "This is a letter from my attorney outlining my intent to pursue legal action for the recovery of my investment, plus damages for breach of contract and unjust enrichment. I'm prepared to take this to court if necessary." "You'd sue your own family?" Mum gasped, tears immediately filling her eyes. "After all we've done for you?" The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "All you've done for me? Like taking my money for 7 years under false pretenses? Like giving away a house I paid for? Like trying to lay claim to my cabin as well?" "The cabin," Emily said, her voice small. "We just thought, since family shares—" "Family shares?" I repeated. "When have you ever shared with me, Emily? When have you ever given up anything for my benefit?" "My entire life, I've been expected to give while you take. That ends today." "You're overreacting," Dad said, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Derek has been helping us financially. He invested in my business expansion. We owe him." "So, you're paying your debt to Derek with my investment," I clarified. "That's not how this works. My financial contribution to this house has nothing to do with whatever arrangements you've made with him." "Look," Derek said, standing straighter, his businessman persona taking over. "We can be reasonable about this. Maybe we can work out some kind of payment plan. But the threats and legal talk aren't necessary. We're family." "Family doesn't steal from family," I replied evenly. "And yes, I do have the keys to the cabin with me since you asked, but they won't do you any good. I've already changed the locks and installed a security system." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it and had to suppress a smile. "That's my property manager in Vermont. He's just confirmed that someone tried to use a key at the cabin about an hour ago. The security system logged the attempt and took photos." Derek's face went pale. My bluff had hit its mark. He'd sent someone to try accessing my cabin even as we were having this conversation. "I think we're done here. I said, gathering my documentation. You have my terms, full compensation for my investment in this house, and written acknowledgement that the cabin is mine alone. I'll give you 1 week to consider before I file the lawsuit. As I turned to leave, Emily burst into tears, her go-to response whenever she didn't get her way. Why are you punishing my baby for this? He deserves a nice home and a place at the lake! I paused at the door, suddenly exhausted by the familiar manipulation. Your baby deserves parents who earn their own way instead of taking from others. What kind of example are you setting for him already? As I walked to my car, I noticed my hand was steady for the first time since this ordeal began. The confrontation hadn't gone perfectly. Nothing with my family ever did. But I'd said my piece, presented my evidence, and stood my ground. I was halfway to my car when I realised something was missing. My purse felt lighter. I checked my pockets, then my bag, a sudden dread washing over me. The cabin keys, my original set before the locks were changed, were gone. They had been in my purse when I arrived. I turned back toward the house just in time to see Derek slipping something into his pocket as he watched me from the window. The message was clear. This war was just beginning. The week following the confrontation was a masterclass in strategic planning. Vanessa connected me with Bernard Goldstein, a litigation attorney specializing in family property disputes. He's not cheap, she warned, but he's worth every penny. Bernard's office occupied the top floor of a Hartford high-rise with views of the Connecticut River. At 60-something, with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, he radiated competence and calm. Family cases are always complicated, he said, after reviewing my documentation. Emotionally and legally, but you've done an excellent job gathering evidence. Do I have a case? I asked bluntly. Yes, he replied without hesitation. Even without your name on the deed, we have substantial documentation of an agreement that you relied on to your financial detriment. The emails and texts from your parents acknowledging it as your house are particularly helpful. And the cabin? Can they make any claim on that? No, Bernard assured me. The cabin is solely in your name. I've verified the property records. It's yours, period. But given their previous behaviour, I recommend taking additional steps to secure it. Over the next few days, I implemented a comprehensive security plan for the cabin. I hired a local contractor to install deadbolts and window locks. A security company added cameras and motion sensors. I contacted the Lake Association and local sheriff's department, informing them that no one had permission to enter my property without my explicit authorization. While I secured the cabin, Bernard investigated my parents' financial situation. What he discovered confirmed my suspicions and added new layers of complication. Your father's insurance business has been struggling for the past few years, Bernard reported during our follow-up meeting, and your parents remortgaged their own home about 18 months ago, around the time Derek started his investment venture in Westport. They invested with Derek, I said, the puzzle pieces fitting together, and lost money when the deal fell through. Exactly. They put in $57,000, likely from their retirement savings. When the development project collapsed, Derek promised to make them whole. That's where your house came in. They sold him my house to cover their investment losses, I said, the betrayal cutting fresh, and he remortgaged it to raise capital for his next scheme. Bernard nodded. The new mortgage on the property is for $250,000. Based on my sources, Derek paid your parents $30,000 for the house, just enough to cover the remaining original mortgage. The rest of that new loan has gone elsewhere. An anonymous email arrived the next day from an unfamiliar address. derekstruth@protonmail.com? The subject line read simply, "You should see this." The email contained links to business filings, news articles and court records. Derek's previous venture in Westport hadn't just fallen through, it had collapsed amid allegations of misrepresented assets and mismanaged funds. No charges had been filed, but several investors had lost significant money. More disturbing were the records of 2 previous business failures following similar patterns: ambitious projects, enthusiastic investors, mismanaged funds, and Derek walking away, relatively unscathed while others absorbed the losses. I forwarded everything to Bernard, who assigned a paralegal to verify the information. Legitimate, he confirmed later, though I'm curious about your source. The mystery was solved 2 days later when I received a text from an unknown number. This is Alison. I dated Derek for 3 years before he met your sister. We should talk. Alison Reeves met me at a cafe halfway between Hartford and Boston. Petite with short dark hair and sharp eyes, she had the precise manner of the pharmaceutical researcher she was. Derek has a pattern, she explained without preamble. He finds people with assets, convinces them to invest in his sure thing, ventures, and somehow manages to come out ahead even when the projects fail. He was working on me for my inheritance when I discovered he was already seeing someone else, your sister. Why are you helping me? I asked. This was years ago. Because he's still doing it, she said, sliding a folder across the table. These are records of his latest venture, a wellness retreat in the Berkshires. He's using the equity from your family home as collateral for loans, and he's already cutting corners on permits and materials. The folder contained building plans, loan applications, and emails between Derek and various contractors, some discussing ways to work around code requirements to save money. This could be useful leverage, I told Bernard when I shared Alison's information. But I'm still not clear on my endgame here. What exactly am I trying to achieve? Bernard leaned back in his chair. That depends on what matters most to you. Do you want the house back, financial compensation, family reconciliation, or simply to protect what's still yours, namely, the cabin? It was a question I'd been avoiding. Part of me wanted scorched earth, to sue them all, expose Derek's shady dealings, and walk away from my toxic family forever. Another part remembered Sunday dinners, Christmas mornings, and the complicated love that existed despite everything. I want 3 things, I finally decided. First, financial compensation for my investment in the house. Second, legal acknowledgement that the cabin is mine alone. And third, I want my parents to understand what they've done, not just to me, but to themselves by enabling Derek and Emily. With these goals established, we developed a 3-part strategy. 1. Legal protection. Formal documentation securing my cabin and preparing litigation for the house investment. Financial independence. Severing all remaining financial ties with my family. Truth documentation. Gathering evidence of Derek's business practices to use as leverage if needed. My 2 closest friends, Zoe and Marcus, became my support system and sounding board. Both had witnessed my family dynamic for years and provided perspective when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. You're not crazy, Zoe assured me during a particularly difficult moment of self-doubt. What they did was wrong, period. And you're not being greedy, Marcus added. You're asking for what's rightfully yours. Armed with legal advice, emotional support, and a clear strategy, I was ready for whatever came next. I didn't have to wait long. Memorial Day weekend arrived with perfect early summer weather, ideal for a first trip to a lakeside cabin. I had planned to spend the long weekend at my Vermont property, reconnecting with the space that represented my independence and taking inventory of what maintenance would be needed for the coming season. I left Boston early Friday morning, arriving at Lake Champlain just after noon. The cabin sat on 2 acres of wooded land, with a path leading down to a small private beach. As I turned onto the gravel driveway, my heart sank. 3 vehicles were parked in front of my cabin. Emily's Mercedes SUV, a white pickup truck with lakeside renovations painted on the side, and my parents' Volvo. For a moment, I considered driving away and calling the police to report trespassers. But I knew this confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it on my terms, on my property. I parked behind my parents' car, blocking them in, and approached my own front door. Before I could use my new key, the door swung open to reveal Derek, in khaki shorts and a polo shirt, looking like he owned the place. "Melissa, what a surprise," he said, not sounding surprised at all. "We were just checking out the space, seeing what updates are needed." "Updates for what?" I asked coldly, remaining on the porch. For the summer, of course, he replied with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. Your parents mentioned you rarely use this place, and with the baby coming. I need everyone out of my cabin now, I said, keeping my voice steady. You are trespassing on private property. Don't be ridiculous, he scoffed. We're family, and your parents gave us permission. My parents can't give permission for property they don't own, I replied, stepping past him into my own living room. The scene inside made my blood boil. A contractor was measuring the stone fireplace while discussing potential changes. Emily sat at my dining table, a laptop open to a Pinterest board titled Lake House Nursery. My parents stood by the kitchen, looking uncomfortable but not intervening. Everyone needs to leave immediately, I announced. This is private property, and none of you have permission to be here. Melissa, don't be difficult, Mum said, using the tone that had silenced me so many times growing up. We're just helping Emily and Derek plan for the summer. The baby will need a cool place during the hot months. My cabin is not available to Emily, Derek, or their baby, I stated firmly. I've already made that clear. Now see here, Dad started, his face reddening. Family shares. You can't possibly use this place all summer, and what Emily needs is not my concern, I interrupted. This property belongs to me. I paid for it with my money. My name is on the deed, and all of you are trespassing. We have a key, Derek said smugly, dangling my stolen original key. Your parents helped us get it. That key was stolen from my purse during our last meeting, I replied, pulling out my phone. I have the security camera footage of you taking it, Derek. That's theft, on top of trespassing. His smug expression faltered. He hadn't realised I'd set up a camera in my parents' living room during our confrontation, a precaution Bernard had suggested. Furthermore, I continued, I changed the locks last week. The only reason that key worked is because I hadn't had a chance to install the new deadbolt yet. That's being remedied today. I gestured to my car, where a new lock set was visible, through the window. You can't just change the locks, Emily protested, her hand automatically going to her stomach, her new method of deflecting criticism. We've already scheduled contractors. The renovation starts next week. What renovation? I asked, genuinely confused. Just some updates, Derek said vaguely. Adding a third bedroom, expanding the deck, maybe a dock for water access. Nothing. Major. You scheduled construction on my property without my knowledge or consent. I was incredulous, despite everything I'd already experienced. Your parents said it would be fine, the contractor interjected, looking increasingly uncomfortable. They said it was a family property. I turned to my parents, who at least had the grace to look embarrassed. Did you tell this man you had authority to approve renovations on my cabin? We thought you'd be reasonable about this, Dad said defensively. Once you calm down about the house, family helps family, Melissa. Family doesn't steal from family, I countered, echoing my words from our previous confrontation. Everyone needs to leave now, or I'm calling the sheriff. You wouldn't, Emily gasped, tears already forming. Not with the baby. The baby is not due for months, and pregnancy is not a get-out-of-trespassing-free card, I said, unmoved by the display I'd seen countless times. I pulled out my phone and dialed the local sheriff's office, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. Franklin County Sheriff's Department, how can I help you? This is Melissa Harrington. I own the property at 247 Lakeshore Drive. I'm currently at my cabin and have discovered several people inside without my permission. I've asked them to leave and they're refusing. We're on our way, Ms. Harrington. Please wait outside if you can do so safely. I ended the call and looked at the shocked faces around me. You have about 15 minutes to gather your things and leave before the sheriff arrives. I suggest you use that time wisely. You'd really call the police on your own family, Mommy? Asked, her voice trembling. On your pregnant sister? Yes, I said simply. Because you've left me no choice. You took my house after I invested 7 years and $200,000 in it. Now you're trying to take my cabin too. Where does it end? Derek says we can work something out, Dad said, glancing at his son-in-law. A timeshare arrangement, maybe. You get it part of the summer, we get it the rest. There is nothing to work out, I stated firmly. This property is mine. Not yours, not Emily's, not Derek's. Mine. And after everything that's happened, I'm not interested in sharing anything with people who've shown so little respect for my boundaries or property rights. The contractor, sensing the family drama he'd stumbled into, quickly packed up his tools and headed for the door. I'll just come back when... Actually, you folks call me when you sort this out, he mumbled, making a hasty exit. You've changed, Emily said accusingly as she closed her laptop. You used to care about family, about me. I've always cared about family, I corrected her. I've spent my entire life caring about this family, financially supporting it, being the responsible one, putting my needs last. But there's a difference between caring about family and allowing myself to be exploited by it. Derek, seeing his renovation plans crumbling, tried a different approach. Be reasonable, Melissa. Your parents owe me. They invested in my business and lost money. This cabin would help make things right. And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting for, now with witnesses. So this is about debt, I said, looking at my parents. You owe Derek money for a failed investment, and you're trying to pay him with my property, just like you did with the house. Dad looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Mum wrung her hands, a nervous habit from childhood. Neither denied it. Did it ever occur to you to just tell me the truth? I asked them. To say, we made a mistake, we lost money, we need help, instead of manipulating and stealing from me. We didn't steal, Dad began. You took something that wasn't yours to take, I interrupted. That's the definition of stealing. The sound of tyres on gravel announced the arrival of the sheriff. Derek looked from me to the door, calculating his options. This isn't over, he said quietly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, all of you, and that's why I'm done being the family doormat. The sheriff was professional and efficient. I showed him my deed, explained the situation, and he supervised as my uninvited guests departed. Emily crying, Derek seething, my parents looking shell-shocked. As they drove away, I felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for what my family had become, and perhaps had always been. But beneath the sadness was something new, a steely resolve to protect what was mine and to finally demand the respect I deserved. I spent the rest of the day installing new locks, taking inventory of the cabin to ensure nothing had been taken, and documenting everything for Bernard. The stolen key, the unauthorized entry, the planned renovations, all of it would strengthen my case if it came to legal action. That evening, sitting on my deck watching the sunset over Lake Champlain, I called Bernard with an update. They showed their hand, he said after I described the confrontation. Derek admitted they're using your property to cover their debts. To him, that's valuable for our case. What's my next move? I asked. We accelerate the timeline, Bernard replied. I'll file the initial paperwork Monday morning. In the meantime, document everything and avoid further direct confrontation if possible. Let the legal system do its work now. As darkness fell over the lake, I felt the first real sense of peace since this ordeal began. I had stood my ground. I had protected what was mine. And most importantly, I had finally stopped playing the role my family had assigned me, the responsible one who sacrifices so others don't have to. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in my cabin that remained mine, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The legal proceedings Bernard initiated created ripples that quickly became waves. Within 2 weeks, the carefully constructed facade my family had maintained began to crack under pressure, revealing truths that had been hidden for years. The mighty first revelation came from an unexpected source. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble, about Derek and the investments. I remained silent, letting her fill the space, a technique Bernard had advised. Your father and I put $57,000 into Derek's Westport development project last year, she continued. It was supposed to be a sure thing, luxury condos near the water. Derek promised 20% returns within 18 months. That's an unrealistic return, Mom, I said gently, especially in this market. I know that now, she admitted. But Derek was so confident, and your father was worried about retirement. Our savings took a hit during the downturn, and we thought this would help us catch up. What happened to the money? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Gone, she said, her voice cracking. The project fell apart. Permit issues, cost overruns, something about contaminated soil. Derek said it wasn't his fault, but... She paused. He promised he'd make it right. That's when he suggested the house arrangement. Said he'd take over the remaining mortgage, give us some cash, and we'd be even. And you agreed to this, I said, knowing I'd been paying the mortgage for 7 years with the understanding it would be mine. We didn't know what else to do, Mum said, a note of desperation in her voice. Your father's business is struggling. That money was a significant portion of our retirement. Derek said it was the only way. Did you consider just telling me the truth? Asking for help directly? The silence that followed was answer enough. Why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. Because Emily called me crying yesterday, Mum said. She and Derek had a huge fight. She found documents showing he's remortgaged their house, your house, for much more than we thought, and he's put that money into another development project, without telling her. This was new information. Emily didn't know about the refinancing. No, Mum confirmed. And there's more. She's afraid, Melissa. She says Derek's been different since all this started. Controlling, secretive. She's thinking about leaving him. While pregnant. This didn't sound like the sister I knew, the one who prioritised appearances and conventional success above all else. She says she can't raise a child with someone she doesn't trust, Mum said. And after seeing how he handled the situation with you in the cabin, she's questioning everything. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with my mother gradually revealing the extent to which Derek had manipulated my parents' finances and decisions. They had remortgaged their own home to invest in his scheme, putting their retirement, security at risk. The house transfer wasn't just about favouring Emily, it was a desperate attempt to recoup losses and maintain the family's financial stability. We should never have put this on you, Mum said at the end, the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I wanted you to know the truth. I shared this conversation with Bernard, who was unsurprised. Family financial entanglements often have deeper roots than initially apparent, he observed. This changes our approach somewhat. Your parents are victims too, in a sense, though that doesn't excuse their treatment of you. The next revelation came from my father, who requested a private meeting without Derek or Emily present. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between Hartford and Boston. Dad looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped. He'd always been a proud man, and seeing him diminished was unsettling despite everything. I made a terrible mistake, he said, after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. Several mistakes, actually. I trusted Derek with our finances when I should have been more cautious. I betrayed your trust with the house arrangement, and I've been treating you unfairly your entire life. The last admission stunned me into silence. My father had never acknowledged the favouritism that had defined our family dynamic. Your Aunt Judith gave me quite an earful, he continued with a rueful smile. Made me see things I'd been avoiding for decades. The way we've always expected more from you than from Emily. The way we've taken your contributions for granted while celebrating her smallest accomplishments. Why? I asked, the question I'd wanted to ask my entire life. Why was it always different for us? Dad sighed heavily. It started when Emily was born. The pregnancy was difficult, and there were complications during delivery. We almost lost both of them. After that, your mother became protective of Emily in a way that wasn't entirely rational, and I went along with it because it seemed easier than fighting it. And me? I was just expected to understand, to be the mature one. I was 4 years old, Dad. You were always so capable, he said, echoing the justification I'd heard throughout my childhood. So independent. You seemed fine, so we focused on Emily. It wasn't fair, and I see that now. He pushed a folder across the table. These are the financial records for the Westport investment and the house transfer. Everything Derek told us, everything we agreed to. Bernard can use it however he needs to for your case. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this contrite man with the father who had so casually given away my house weeks earlier. Why are you doing this? Because I'm trying to make things right, he said simply. And because Derek isn't who we thought he was. Emily found evidence that he's been misrepresenting his business dealings for years. The money from refinancing your house, he's already lost a significant portion of it in another venture. This aligned with what my mother had shared and what Alison had discovered. Derek's pattern of financial manipulation was becoming clearer with each new piece of information. Is Emily really considering leaving him? I asked. Dad nodded gravely. She's staying with us temporarily. Says she needs space to think. Derek's not happy about it. He's been calling constantly, showing up at the house unannounced. I'm worried about her. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a lifetime of Emily being the favoured child, I was now being asked to understand and potentially help with her marital problems. But my issue wasn't with Emily, not really. She had benefited from our parents' favouritism, but she hadn't created it. I'll need to think about all this, I told Dad, taking the folder. I can't just forget what happened with the house and the cabin. I understand, he said. We don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope someday we might earn back your trust. As I drove back to Boston, I reflected on how quickly the family dynamic had shifted. The golden son-in-law was now the villain, the perfect couple was fracturing, and my parents, who had been so certain of their decisions, were now questioning everything. The final thread in the family web came loose a week later when I received an unexpected visitor at my Boston apartment. Emily stood in my hallway, her pregnancy now more visible at 5 months, her face pale and drawn. Can I come in? She asked, none of her usual confidence in her voice. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Whatever was happening, it had driven my sister to seek me out for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. Emily perched awkwardly on the edge of my sofa, declining my offer of tea or water. I left Derek, she said without preamble. For good this time. Mom mentioned you were thinking about it, I said cautiously. What happened? I found out he's been lying about everything, she replied, her voice bitter. The investment losses, the business ventures, even our finances. We're not just in debt, Melissa. We're underwater. He's taken out loans against everything we own, including the house. Our parents' house, I corrected gently. The one I paid for. Emily had the grace to look ashamed. Yes, your house. I knew it was wrong, what they did to you. I knew, and I went along with it because it benefited me. I've been doing that my whole life, haven't I? Accepting the preferential treatment, the gifts, the support, all at your expense. The admission was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. Emily had never acknowledged the favouritism before, had always acted as if her preferred status was natural and deserved. Why now? I asked finally. After all these years, why are you acknowledging this now? Emily looked down at her hands. Because I'm going to be a mother, and watching Derek manipulate everyone, including me, made me realise I don't want my son growing up in a family built on lies and manipulation. I don't want him to be the golden child who never faces consequences, or the scapegoat who bears everyone's burdens. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I'm scared, Melissa. I have no job, no savings of my own. I'm pregnant and getting divorced. I've never had to stand on my own before. In that moment, I saw my sister clearly. Not as the favoured child who had everything handed to her, but as someone who had been denied the chance to develop resilience and self-sufficiency. Our parents' favoritism had crippled her in ways different from, but perhaps as damaging as, the ways it had hurt me. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Stay with Mum and Dad for now. Try to find a job, though who's going to hire a pregnant woman with no recent work experience? Figure out what assets, if any, aren't tied up in Derek's schemes." I should have felt satisfaction seeing Emily humbled like this. After decades of being the favourite, she was experiencing the insecurity and self-doubt I'd lived with my entire life. But all I felt was sadness for the relationship we might have had if our parents hadn't pitted us against each other from the beginning. "I'm sorry," Emily said suddenly. "For everything. For the house. For the cabin. For a lifetime of taking. While you gave, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I see it now. All of it." As she left, promising to keep me updated on the divorce proceedings, I called Bernard with the latest developments. "This changes the calculation," he said thoughtfully. "If Emily is leaving Derek and acknowledging the wrongful treatment you received, we may be able to negotiate a more amicable resolution. Family reconciliation could be possible, if that's what you want." "I'm not sure what I want anymore," I admitted, "except what's rightfully mine." "Well, on that front, I have good news," Bernard replied. "Derek's business practices have attracted attention from the State Financial Regulatory Board. An anonymous tip, possibly from your friend Alison, triggered an investigation into his real estate dealings. This gives us significant leverage in our negotiations." The final piece fell into place when my parents requested a family meeting, this time at Bernard's office with all parties represented by counsel. Derek arrived with an expensive Hartford attorney, known for handling high-profile divorces. Emily came alone, but had consulted with a lawyer beforehand. My parents brought their longtime family attorney, a contemporary of my father's, who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Let's get to the point," Bernard began once everyone was seated. "We're here to resolve the financial claims Ms. Harrington has regarding the property at 45 Maple Street, which she invested in significantly over 7 years with the understanding it would eventually be hers." Derek's attorney started to object, but Derek silenced him with a gesture. "I'm prepared to offer $50,000 as settlement for any claims Melissa believes she has on the property," he said smoothly. "That's generous, considering the circumstances." "My client invested $224,000 in mortgage payments and renovations," Bernard countered, "based on documentation we've provided. Additionally, we have extensive evidence of the verbal agreement that the house would ultimately belong to her." "Verbal agreements aren't," Derek's attorney began. "Furthermore," Bernard continued, "we have documentation indicating Mr. Chamberlain was aware of this arrangement when he accepted the property transfer, making him potentially liable for interfering with a contractual relationship." Derek's confident facade cracked slightly. "What documentation?" Bernard slid a printout across the table, text messages between Derek and my father from 18 months earlier, discussing the house as Melissa's investment and acknowledging the arrangement. My father had provided them as part of his attempt to make amends. "Given the ongoing investigation into Mr. Chamberlain's business practices by the State Regulatory Board," Bernard added casually, "I imagine he'd prefer to resolve this matter quickly and quietly." The colour drained from Derek's face. "What investigation?" "Oh, did your attorney not inform you?" Bernard asked with feigned surprise. "The board is looking into several of your development projects, including the Westport venture and your current Berkshire's proposal. Something about misrepresentation to investors and improper use of loan proceeds." The meeting shifted dramatically after that revelation. Derek's attorney requested a brief recess, during which I imagined frantic phone calls were made. When they returned, Derek's demeanour had changed from confident to conciliatory. "I'm prepared to offer full compensation for Melissa's investment in the house," he said tightly. $224,000, payable in instalments over 5 years. My client requires full payment within 12 months, with the cabin property explicitly excluded from any family use or claim, Bernard countered. After 2 hours of negotiation, we reached an agreement. Derek would pay me the full amount within 18 months, secured by a lien against the house. My cabin would be acknowledged in writing as my sole property, and most surprisingly, Emily announced her intention to sell the house once the divorce was finalised and return my portion of the proceeds immediately. "I don't want anything that was taken from my sister," she said firmly, ignoring Derek's glare from across the table. As we prepared to leave, Derek pulled me aside, his voice low and threatening. "This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do," I replied calmly. "I'm dealing with a man who manipulated my family, stole my property, and is now facing the consequences of his actions. And just so we're clear, if anything happens to my cabin, if anyone in my family experiences any further pressure or threats from you, the State Regulatory Board will receive a much more detailed, anonymous tip about your business practices." For the first time since I'd known him, Derek Chamberlain had nothing to say. 6 months after the confrontation at my cabin, I stood in my new apartment in Cambridge, unpacking the last of my boxes. The 2-bedroom corner unit with exposed brick walls and huge windows overlooking the Charles River represented more than just a new home. It symbolised my complete financial independence from my family. The settlement money from Derek had come through faster than expected. Facing increasing scrutiny from regulators and creditors, he had scrambled to resolve our dispute, likely hoping it would help his image with the investigation board. The first payment arrived 3 months after our agreement, allowing me to put a substantial down payment on this apartment. Emily had made good on her promise too. She had filed for divorce and put the house on the market, despite Derek's attempts, to block the sale. When it sold for slightly below asking price, she immediately transferred my portion of the proceeds, insisting on calculating it based on the full sale amount, not just my documented investment. "It's the least I can do," she had said when I expressed surprise at her insistence on giving me the larger amount. "I benefited from your work on that house for years. The equity you built is yours." Emily had moved in with our parents temporarily, her pregnancy now in its final weeks. According to my mother's weekly updates, a new development in our relationship, Emily had found a part-time job at a local bookstore and was taking online courses to complete her degree. Small steps toward independence, but significant ones, for a woman who had been financially dependent on others her entire adult life. My parents had begun therapy, both individually and as a couple. Dad's insurance business was still struggling, but he'd taken on a partner to help modernise operations and was slowly rebuilding. They had downsized to a small condo, using the proceeds from their house sale to pay off debts and rebuild their retirement savings. The cabin remained mine, untouched and secure. I'd spent several weekends there over the summer, reconnecting with the peace it offered. I'd invited Zoe and Marcus up for the 4th of July, filling the space with friendship and laughter instead, of family tension. Some wounds would take longer to heal than others, but I was making progress. As for Derek, his carefully constructed world was unravelling. The regulatory investigation had expanded to include all his business dealings from the past 5 years. Several former investors had filed civil suits. His reputation in Connecticut's business community was in tatters. Emily's divorce proceedings had revealed financial deceptions that surprised even me. Hidden accounts, misrepresented assets, loans taken in her name without her knowledge. I finished unpacking my last box and surveyed my new space with satisfaction. The furniture was a mix of pieces I'd saved from the house, items I'd bought for my Boston apartment, and a few new splurges to celebrate this fresh start. On the wall hung a framed architectural drawing, my first major design that had won an award in graduate school. My parents had never displayed it, but Aunt Judith had kept it all these years and returned it to me as a housewarming gift. My phone chimed, with a text from Mum. "Thanksgiving dinner at our new place? Nothing fancy, just family. Emily would love to see you, and we promise no drama." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. The invitation represented a tentative step toward rebuilding our relationship. Not erasing the past or pretending the wounds hadn't happened, but acknowledging them and trying to move forward. After careful consideration, I replied, "I'll bring dessert. No drama sounds perfect." 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting at my parents' small dining table in their new condo. The space was modest compared to the house I'd renovated for years, but they'd made it warm and inviting. Emily sat across from me, her son Richard, now 3 weeks old, sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside her. The conversation was cautious. At first, everyone hyper-aware of the broken trust that had brought us to this point. But as the meal progressed, something shifted. Dad asked thoughtful questions about my latest project instead of dismissing my career as he once might have. Mum served everyone equal portions of the holiday dishes instead of giving Emily subtle extras. And Emily herself spoke with new confidence about her classes and her plans for a small apartment of her own in the spring. "I want to thank you all for coming today," Dad said as we finished the meal. "Especially you, Melissa. I know we don't deserve your forgiveness after what we did." "We're trying to do better," Mum added, her eyes filling with tears. "The therapist has helped us see patterns we didn't even realise were there. How we've treated you both differently from the beginning. And how that hurt both of us," Emily said, glancing at me. "Me as much as Melissa, just in different ways. I never learned to stand on my own because I was never expected to." "We can't change the past," Dad continued, "but we can acknowledge it and try to build something better going forward. If you're willing to try with us, Melissa." I looked around the table at my family, flawed, complicated, but making genuine efforts to change. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. "Not to forget, but to move forward. With boundaries and respect on all sides." "That's all we can ask," Mum said, reaching for my hand across the table. After dinner, Emily asked if I would hold Richard while she helped clear the dishes, a small gesture of trust that meant more than she probably realised. As I cradled my nephew, his tiny hand wrapping around my finger, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal over the house and cabin had been devastating, but it had also forced long overdue reckonings. It had exposed toxic patterns, brought secrets to light, and ultimately created space for something healthier to emerge. Not perfect, not without scars, but potentially stronger for having been broken and mended. My family was different now. My father, humbled by financial mistakes and the near loss of both his daughters. My mother, finally seeing the damage her favouritism had caused. Emily, growing into independence she'd never been allowed to develop. And me, no longer the family doormat, but an equal member with boundaries that were respected. As I drove home, to my new apartment that evening, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. The importance of clear agreements even, especially with family. The courage required to stand up for yourself when it would be easier to give in. The freedom that comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to set firm boundaries. Sometimes the path to healing begins with the word no. And sometimes, what feels like the end of a relationship is actually the beginning of a healthier one. Has your family ever taken advantage of your generosity or expected you to sacrifice while others took? Or have you found yourself having to stand up to loved ones to protect what's yours? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Every time we share these experiences, we help someone else feel less alone in theirs. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life family stories. Your support means everything to me as I continue sharing the difficult but important lessons I've learned about family, boundaries, and self-worth. Thank you for witnessing my journey, the betrayal, the fight, and finally, the resolution that allowed me to rebuild not just my financial security, but my sense of self within my family.